The day he made me pick up my shredded proposal from the boardroom floor, I decided I wouldn't just rise. I'd dismantle his world from the inside out. The air in the conference room always felt thin when Mr. Harrison was present. It was like walking into a vacuum-sealed container where only his breath mattered. I remember that day with the crystal clarity of a mugshot photo, the quarterly review. I was 26, fresh out of grad school, and ridiculously eager to prove myself at Omnicorp. I was the only black man in that room, something I usually tried to ignore, but Harrison made it impossible. He was mid-50s, built like a disgruntled bulldog, and possessed a voice that grated like sandpaper on glass. He had this way of leaning back in his ergonomic leather chair, steeple-fingering his expensive watch, and making you feel like a particularly slow-witted insect. My proposal, a radical but meticulously researched overhaul of the supply chain logistics, was on the massive monitor, projected in crisp 4K. I'd poured 3 months of 18-hour days into those slides. "So, Marcus," Harrison drawled, using my first name like it was a mild insult. His tone immediately signaled that whatever I had to say was already beneath him. There were 4 senior VPs present, all pale men who mirrored Harrison's discomfort with anyone who didn't look like them or come from their alma mater. "Mr. Harrison, if you look at slide 19, you'll see the projected savings, a conservative estimate of 18% reduction in Q3 overhead alone, assuming we integrate the new routing software." I tried to keep my voice steady, projecting confidence I didn't entirely feel. I gestured toward the screen, but Harrison didn't look up. "Savings, Marcus. Always savings with you young lions. You think this company runs on spreadsheets and wishful thinking?" He finally lifted his gaze, and his eyes, pale blue and utterly devoid of warmth, locked onto mine. The VP of Operations, poor old Roger, shifted nervously in his seat. "Sir, with respect, this isn't wishful thinking. It's data modeling. We've been bleeding capital on legacy infrastructure for 5 years. This model mitigates that bleed immediately." Harrison actually laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. It was a short, sharp bark. "Mitigates. Let me tell you something about mitigation, Marcus. You're mitigating your own ambition by sitting here wasting our time with this theoretical fluff." He stood up, towering over the table, and walked slowly toward the screen, looming over my meticulously crafted charts. He didn't touch the keyboard. He didn't need to. He just stood there, his shadow engulfing the data. "Look at this, gentlemen," he said, addressing the other VPs, but gesturing toward me as if I were the chart. "Look at this young man's passion. He's got the fire. I'll give him that. But fire without discipline burns the house down." Then came the moment that burned itself into my memory. Harrison reached out, not to the screen, but to my meticulously organized stack of printouts, the backup hard copies, and deliberately swept them onto the plush, cream-colored carpet. Papers scattered everywhere. A chart sliding under chairs, my notes fluttering like defeated white flags. "Pick that up, Marcus," he said, his voice suddenly low, dangerous. "Pick it up. And then you go back to your little cubicle and you figure out how to present something real. Something that doesn't insult the intelligence of the people who actually built this empire." The silence that followed was deafening. My face felt like it was on fire, kneeling down on that expensive carpet, gathering the crumpled remnants of my hard work while 4 executives watched, feeling the weight of my colleagues' pity and Harrison's absolute contempt. It was pure, concentrated humiliation. I didn't say a word. I just gathered the mess, stood up, placed the crumpled pile back on the table, and walked out. I remember the tight, strangled feeling in my chest. That day, I didn't just feel disrespected. I felt erased. I told myself I would never, ever forget the look in Harrison's eyes, or the feel of that carpet under my knees. That was the day my ambition hardened into something cold, precise, and patient. I stayed at Omnicorp, but my focus shifted. I wasn't just working for a promotion anymore. I was studying the architecture of power, specifically Harrison's. I watched him. I learned his weaknesses. I catalogued every arrogant remark, every questionable deal, every piece of proprietary information he carelessly shared in late-night, overly lubricated meetings. Years passed. I climbed, quietly, effectively, moving laterally when necessary, always ensuring my work spoke volumes while my profile remained low. Harrison, secure in his mid-level managerial perch, never once acknowledged my existence outside of those early, humiliating reviews. He kept promoting the same types of people, the ones who mirrored him, while I built critical infrastructure and secured contracts he never even knew were being negotiated. Then the news broke. The CEO, old Mr. Henderson, was retiring immediately due to health complications. The board needed an interim leader, fast. Speculation ran wild. Harrison was quietly floating his own name, citing his decades of loyal service. I, Marcus, was nowhere near the conversation. I was Senior Director of Global Strategy, good title, but still miles below the executive suite. 2 weeks later, the internal email dropped at 8 a.m. sharp. The subject line was simply, New Leadership Announcement. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it, bracing myself for the usual corporate platitudes. But the name wasn't Harrison. It wasn't Roger. It was mine. It is with immense pleasure that the Board of Directors announces the appointment of Marcus J. Evans as Interim Chief Executive Officer of Omnicorp, effective immediately. I read the words 3 times. Interim CEO, the first black CEO in the company's 70-year history. The phone in my office, a quiet corner office I'd earned not by demanding attention, but by delivering impossible results, began to vibrate relentlessly. Board members, external partners, former rivals, all suddenly desperate to connect. I stood up, walked to the window overlooking the sprawling city, and allowed myself one deep, slow breath. And the view was incredible. Then my assistant buzzed in, her voice slightly shaky, betraying the panic in the wider executive suite. Mr. Evans, sir. Mr. Harrison from Logistics is on line 1. He sounds distressed. He's demanding to speak to you immediately regarding a critical procedural matter. I looked down at the blinking red light on my desk phone. Harrison. Distressed. Demanding. The architect of my lowest moment, now scrambling for a lifeline, reaching out to the man he once ordered to pick up crumpled papers from the floor. The silence in my office was thick now, charged with years of suppressed memory. I reached out a steady hand, my fingers brushing the receiver. I didn't pick up. I let it ring 3 more times, savoring the digital distress signal echoing in the sudden, powerful quiet of my new domain. Then, I tapped the intercom for my assistant. Hold all calls, I instructed, my voice calm, authoritative, utterly transformed. Except for one. Transfer Mr. Harrison to my secure line, and tell him I'll be with him in precisely 10 minutes. The tension ratcheted up. 10 minutes, an eternity when you're begging for scraps. As I waited, I leaned back in the new, expensive chair, far superior to the one Harrison used to occupy, and I smiled, a cold, professional smile. Then I remembered the carpet. I looked down at my polished Italian leather shoes, a gift from the first major contract I landed after that review. I had to see him. I had to give him the moment he deserved, or rather, the moment I deserved. I stood up, straightening my tie. I had a meeting to get to, but first I needed to check the archives. I picked up my desk phone receiver, and instead of hitting the transfer button, I typed in a specific internal extension, one I hadn't dialed in years. It was the extension for building maintenance. Yes, I said to the bewildered voice that answered. I need a cleaning crew dispatched to Conference Room B immediately. I want the carpet steam cleaned. There seems to be some old, ingrained residue from a particularly messy meeting several years ago. Make sure it's spotless. I might be dropping by later. I hung up. Then finally, I pressed the transfer button for Harrison. Hello, David, I said, my voice dripping with corporate cordiality. This is Marcus Evans, CEO. You have my ear for the next 10 minutes. Ask what seems to be the emergency. The moment I spoke my new title, CEO, the silence on Harrison's end was profoundly different from the silence in the conference room all those years ago. That silence was filled with shame and impotence. This silence was pure, unadulterated shock, punctuated only by the ragged sound of his breathing being forced through a suddenly constricted throat. Marcus, he finally sputtered, the name sounding foreign and entirely wrong coming from his mouth. The bulldog bravado was gone, replaced by the squeak of a trapped rodent. It's Mr. Evans now, David, I corrected him gently, leaning back and steepling my fingers exactly the way he used to. The mimicry felt exquisitely satisfying. Or perhaps you prefer the designation you used for me during the Q3 review. I'm flexible, as long as it's respectful of the hierarchy. Marcus, Evans, I apologize. This is unexpected. Truly unprecedented news. Congratulations, sir. A massive win for diversity, and I mean that sincerely. The sincerity was so thin I could practically see through it to the panic beneath. He was already performing, adapting to the new reality, trying to scrub the past clean with cheap polish. I appreciate the well wishes, David. Now you mentioned a procedural matter. Is this regarding the acquisition of Allied Logistics? Because my team assures me that paperwork is ironclad and scheduled for final signing tomorrow morning. I threw out a random, high-stakes topic, watching him stumble. No, not that. That's fine. It's lower level, frankly. It's about the Q4 projections for the regional distribution centers. There seems to be a discrepancy in the data modeling I submitted last week. I need your sign-off before the board meets on Friday, or we risk a substantial downward revision to our sector outlook. He was throwing me a lifeline, asking for my direct intervention on a problem he couldn't handle alone, a problem he clearly still assumed I was incapable of understanding, unless he explained it slowly. The irony was exquisite. The discrepancy he mentioned was the very model he'd publicly derided years prior, the one I had been refining in the background, completely independent of the official corporate channels he controlled. I had spent years building the shadow infrastructure that was now eclipsing his own department. The Q4 projections, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. David, I'm a little busy restructuring the entire operational framework of this multinational company right now, but I'll look at your submission, send it over. Wait, no, don't send it. I remember your previous submissions very well. I'll review the raw data sets myself. I could almost hear him sweating through the phone line. The raw data, sir, that's sensitive. It's proprietary modeling. Proprietary? I cut him off, my voice hardening instantly. David, as of this morning, everything at Omnicorp is proprietary to me. Send me the file pathway immediately, and while you're at it, I need you to compile a complete, index list of every training expenditure your department has authorized in the last fiscal year, cross-referenced with external consultant fees. I want to know exactly where our legacy infrastructure budget is actually going. He sputtered again, a tiny, wounded sound. But that's not related to the projections, Mr. Evans. That's an internal audit request. It's related to ensuring the foundation of this company is sound, David. A foundation you and I both have very different relationships with. Send the data. Within the hour. And David? Yes, sir? His voice was barely a whisper now. Don't bother coming up to the executive floor today. In fact, clear your schedule for the next 3 weeks. I'll let you know when I require your physical presence. Until then, you work from your desk and send me nothing but actionable data. Understood? Yes, Mr. Evans. Understood. I terminated the call, a slow, satisfied grin spreading across my face. That was the soft kill, the administrative strangulation. But the main event was yet to come. I buzzed my assistant again, Ms. Chen, who was proving to be ruthlessly efficient. Ms. Chen, I need you to pull the personnel file for David Harrison. Specifically, I want every disciplinary note, every HR complaint filed against him, dating back 10 years. And I want the full security log for Conference Room B for the last 5 years. Pay particular attention to any unusual access requests or maintenance performed around the time of my Q3 review. Right away, Mr. Evans. Should I schedule a meeting with Mr. Harrison? Not yet. First, I need to see the layout of his office. I want to know exactly where he sits. And Ms. Chen, when you send out the company-wide memo detailing the new organizational chart for the executive team, the one I'll approve this afternoon, ensure David Harrison's title is listed precisely as Senior Director, Special Projects, and Historical Review. No reporting structure mentioned. It's just Historical Review. I looked at the clock. It was 9:15 a.m. The humiliation had taken place at 10 a.m. 14 years ago. I had precisely 45 minutes until I walked into Conference Room B. I rose from my chair, walked toward the door, and paused. My new chief of staff, a sharp woman named Sarah, was standing just outside, holding a slim folder marked Urgent. "The board package for today's emergency meeting, sir," she murmured, handing it over. "And a small issue has cropped up. The head of legal, Mr. Thorne, is refusing to sign off on your initial executive reorganization memo. He claims it violates several fiduciary duties related to the sudden and unexplained demotion of a long-standing senior executive." My gaze sharpened. Thorne. Another one of Harrison's old guard friends, a gatekeeper. This was better than I could have orchestrated. A direct challenge to my authority. Less than 2 hours into the job. "What exactly is Thorne citing as the violation?" I asked, my voice low. "He says you can't reassign David Harrison without a minimum 30-day performance review period, and he's threatening to stall the entire board approval process until we comply with standard protocol." I took the rejection memo from Sarah and slowly tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter down onto the plush carpet outside my new office door, right where Harrison had once made me kneel. I looked down at the debris, then back up at Sarah, my eyes blazing with focused intent. "Sarah, call legal. Tell Mr. Thorne I want him in my office in 5 minutes, and tell him to bring the original signed employment contract for David Harrison. Specifically, I want the clause detailing gross misconduct or extreme dereliction of duty reviewed. Then tell him to bring the internal memo from 2010 detailing the termination of Marcus Evans's initial probationary period for lack of executive presence. I want to see which documents he thinks hold more weight in my company." Mr. Thorne arrived exactly 5 minutes later, looking less like the formidable head of Omnicorp's legal department, and more like a man who had just realized he'd locked his keys in his car while the engine was running. He was slick, overly polished, and currently sweating through his bespoke suit jacket. He stood awkwardly in the threshold of my office, clearly unwilling to cross the invisible line that separated the old hierarchy from the new. "Mr. Evans," he began, attempting the formal reverence he usually reserved for the now-retired CEO, "I must express my deep concern over the proposed restructuring concerning Mr. Harrison. My fiduciary responsibility demands I caution you against implementing such sudden punitive action without due process." I didn't invite him in. I gestured instead toward the small, meticulously placed pile of torn paper on the floor near the doorway. "Take a look at that, Thorne. That's due process in action. That's what happens when competence is mistaken for compliance. Sit down." Thorne visibly swallowed hard but obeyed, sinking into the guest chair as if it were lined with needles. "Let's discuss process, shall we?" I leaned forward, placing the 2 files Sarah had procured, Harrison's current contract and the ancient, yellowed file containing my own near-termination notice, side by side on the desk. "The contract you cite regarding Mr. Harrison's protection mentions gross misconduct. Let's explore that. I'm looking at Section 4C. Does intentionally creating a hostile, discriminatory work environment designed to sabotage the professional advancement of a subordinate qualify under gross misconduct, in your expert legal opinion?" Thorne blinked rapidly, his mind clearly scrambling to cross-reference decades of precedent with the immediate threat standing before him. "Mr. Evans, that's a difficult standard to prove. It requires evidence of systemic intent." "Systemic intent," I echoed dryly. How about verbal abuse coupled with documented public humiliation by a superior officer?" "Thorne, you were present at the Q3 review in 2014. You sat 10 feet away when David Harrison made me pick up my presentation notes off the carpet. You watched it happen." Thorne's face went pale. I recall the meeting, yes. But that was a performance issue, a robust debate over strategy." "A debate where one party was physically degraded?" I interrupted, my voice dangerously quiet. "If I had filed a complaint then, Thorne, based on what you witnessed, what would Omnicorp's liability have been?" He stammered, desperate to regain control of the legal narrative. "Significant, potentially, depending on the testimony of the VPs present. But it didn't happen. You chose not to press charges or file a complaint then, sir. You accepted the review and moved on. That decision falls under precedent now. We cannot revisit it." But I did file something," I countered, tapping the second older file. "I filed something even more significant. A decision, Look at this, Thorne. This is my probationary review from the same year Harrison is now citing for protection. Lack of executive presence. The reasoning cited by the review committee, which included Harrison and 2 of your current friends on the board, was that I lack the temperament to navigate the established social dynamics of the executive tier. I paused, letting the weight of the irony settle. They fired me, Thorne, or rather they tried to push me out. I fought it. I leveraged every piece of data I had, and I negotiated my transfer to a lower tier position, agreeing to a non-disclosure clause regarding the review's contents, contingent on not challenging the committee's finding of my lack of presence. I stayed because I knew the infrastructure was flawed, and I knew I could fix it from the inside. I traded immediate victory for long-term leverage. I leaned back, a cold satisfaction washing over me. Now you tell me, Thorne, which document holds more legal water? The one where Harrison's conduct might be deemed misconduct based on witness testimony you possess, or the one where I, the newly appointed CEO, was previously deemed unfit by the very same people who enabled Harrison, yet I chose to stay and excel anyway? Thorne stared at the 2 files, as the implication hanging heavy between us. If he pushed the issue of Harrison's demotion based on protocol, I could unleash the full force of my CEO authority to launch a full internal investigation into the 2014 review. An investigation that would inevitably implicate him, Harrison, and several board members in systemic, racially tinged retaliation. It would be a corporate bloodbath, and Thorne knew his career, built on protecting the status quo, would be the first casualty. "Mr. Evans," Thorne breathed out, his defiance completely gone. I withdraw my objection to the organizational structure. I will draft the necessary assurances to the board immediately, citing strategic realignment necessitated by unforeseen executive synergy. I apologize for my overzealous adherence to outdated protocol. "See that you do," I said, and dismissing him with a curt nod. As Thorne scrambled out, I felt a surge of power, not just the title, but the control over the truth. The office door opened again, and Sarah stepped in, looking slightly awestruck. "Mr. Evans, the cleaning crew just confirmed Conference Room B is spotless. They even managed to get the stain out of the carpet fibers. And I have an update on Mr. Harrison. He sent the requested data. The Q4 projections are, as you suspected, fundamentally flawed. His whole team is paralyzed. However, in the accompanying email, he attached a highly irregular, encrypted personal file addressed only to you. It seems to be a very old financial document." I frowned. Harrison was drowning, but why would he send me something encrypted and personal? "Decrypt it, Sarah. Now." A minute later, Sarah's eyes widened as the file rendered on her tablet. "Sir, it's a trust document from 2012. It details the funding of a small private holding company set up by Mr. Harrison's late father, a company that, according to this document, was set up specifically to provide long-term financial security for the families of Omnicorp's senior management in the event of a hostile takeover. And the relevance to me? I asked, leaning forward, suddenly cautious. The document shows that Mr. Harrison's father transferred a significant block of shares, a controlling interest actually, in that holding company to his only viable heir for management oversight. That heir, sir, is listed here, signed and notarized as David Harrison's cousin, Marcus Evans. Sarah looked up at me, her voice trembling slightly. "Sir, David Harrison isn't just your subordinate. According to this document, he's your cousin, and his entire family legacy, tied up in Omnicorp stock, is currently controlled by you." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, sucking the air out of the room. My own name, attached to a document I had never seen, signed by a man I barely remembered, connected to a side of my family that had always been estranged, distant, almost mythical, the estranged side, the side that my mother always refused to speak about. David Harrison's father was my father's estranged brother. The humiliation in the conference room hadn't just been professional rivalry. It had been the clumsy, cruel assertion of dominance by a privileged cousin over the relative he deemed beneath him, the poor, ambitious kin who dared to enter his world. "Decrypt the full contents," I ordered Sarah, my voice devoid of emotion. The satisfying heat of vengeance suddenly cooled into something far more complex: obligation, history, and a terrifying understanding of leverage. I wasn't just the CEO, I was family, and Harrison had just handed me the key to his entire dynasty without realizing it. Sarah worked quickly, the digital lock giving way under the CEO's override command. The file expanded, revealing not just the share transfer, but the bylaws of the holding company, Equitas Capital. The shares weren't just a passive investment, they represented a significant, untraceable voting bloc that Harrison's father had meticulously built over decades, a silent parachute against corporate instability. And now that parachute belonged to me. What is the current valuation of Equitas Capital, Sarah, based on Omnicorp's current stock price? I asked. Sarah typed furiously, her initial shock giving way to the cold focus of an executive assistant under pressure. Sir, it holds just under 12% of Omnicorp's total outstanding shares. At yesterday's closing price, that's worth approximately $1.4 billion in current market value. $1.4 billion. Harrison's family wealth, his perceived security blanket, was now mine to command. He hadn't just been humiliating me. He had been guarding a family treasure he thought he alone was entitled to. "Ms. Chen," I said, standing up slowly, walking back toward the window. The city looked different now. It wasn't just a view, it was my dominion, complicated by ties I hadn't known existed. "Schedule a private meeting with Mr. Harrison, not in conference room B. My office, 10 minutes from now, and ensure complete privacy, no security, no assistance, just him and me." When Harrison shuffled into my office, his posture now completely defeated, anticipating the final, brutal firing blow, he didn't even look at me. He stood near the doorway, ready to be dismissed from existence. "You wanted to talk about Q4 projections, David," I began, gesturing to the chair. He remained standing. "Sir, I accept whatever decision you make. I was wrong about the data, and I was wrong to challenge your restructuring. I'm prepared to tender my resignation immediately and sign any non-disclosure agreement required to ensure a clean transition." His voice cracked on the last word. I walked around my desk, stopping directly in front of him. I looked not at his face, but at the expensive gold signet ring on his left hand, the ring of a man born to command. "You think this is about the Q4 projections, David? You think this is about performance reviews?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single crisp printout of the Equitas Capital Trust document, placing it gently on the corner of my desk so that only he could see the signature line clearly. His eyes flicked down to the paper. The color drained from his face so rapidly it was almost disconcerting. He didn't need to read the details. The sight of the document was the full execution order. He recognized his father's signature. He recognized my name. How did you get that?" he whispered, his knees visibly trembling, the same trembling I had once caused him to witness in me. "You sent it to me, David," I replied, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "You were so desperate for my help with your flawed projections, so panicked about losing control, that you accidentally forwarded me the one document that proves your entire career has been resting on a legacy built by the family you scorned. Your father knew you lacked the vision to manage that power, but he made you the custodian anyway, hoping you'd hold it until the right time. You just delivered it to the rightful heir prematurely." I let the silence stretch, letting him drown in the knowledge of his own monumental error. "You wanted to humiliate the subordinate, David. You wanted to control the narrative. But the narrative was always mine. I spent 14 years learning the game you were born into. I learned patience. I learned precision. And now I own the very foundation you thought made you untouchable." I took a deep breath, the weight of the billion-dollar leverage settling onto my shoulders. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restructuring the entire power dynamic, personal and professional. "Here is the deal, David," I stated, my voice firm and final. "You will resign from Omnicorp, effective immediately, citing personal health reasons. You will sign a full, unequivocal waiver regarding any past workplace disputes involving me, and you will transfer full, unrestricted control of Equitas Capital to me by sundown today. In return," I paused, offering him the narrowest sliver of mercy, I will ensure your family, your father's legacy, remains untouched, liquid, and secure. Omnicorp's stock will remain healthy, and Equitas will be managed prudently, far away from the boardroom politics you clearly struggle with. He stood there, utterly broken, staring at the document that represented both his downfall and his only chance at preserving his immediate future. The man who had once made me kneel on the carpet was now begging silently for clemency. "Do we have an agreement, cousin?" I asked. He nodded once, a tiny, jerky movement of submission. "We have an agreement, Marcus." "Good," I said, picking up the trust document and tucking it safely into my inner jacket pocket, right over my heart. "Now, leave my office, and David, don't ever mistake quiet competency for lack of ambition again." As he turned and walked out, utterly defeated, I returned to my desk. Sarah hovered near the intercom, awaiting my next command. I picked up the phone, dialing the number for legal. "Thorne," I said crisply, "the Harrison resignation is finalized. Regarding the organizational chart, you can now officially remove his title entirely. Furthermore, I need you to initiate a formal, company-wide search for a new senior director of global logistics. And Sarah?" "Yes, Mr. Evans? Cancel the cleaning crew for conference room B. I think it's important we keep that carpet exactly as it is, a permanent reminder